Hey everyone, welcome back to my Numbers In series. This is going to be the 6th video in our estimation mini-series, and today we are doing division. So you might wonder why I didn't do division right after multiplication, because those are two very interrelated operations, right? But it turns out the division problems they like to make slightly harder, and they like to make it so that we have to use even techniques from like the exponent video, which is why I decided to do this after exponents and roots. For example, you're often going to see questions like this, 61 to the power 4 divided by 1,000, which is a little bit vile, but as long as we're familiar with the exponent stuff, it shouldn't be a big problem. And we also have a different kind of problem that I'll get to later. But 61 to the power 4, this is kind of difficult. How do we do 61 to the 4th? Well, there's not a super nice way of doing it, I will admit, but one thing that we can do is call it 61 squared first. Then what we can do is, instead of doing 61 squared, we can do 60 times 62, because we know by difference of squares, if you watch my other videos, you'll know that this is actually extremely close. So we can do 60 times 62, and then, there's not really a nice way to do this, so we do have to do this in our heads. 60 times 62, that's going to be 3720. So what's 3720 squared? Then once again, we're kind of thinking, how can we make this nicer? I think the best way to do it is probably to say it's like 3,700 squared. Then 37 squared, if you haven't memorized it, which you should, another alternative way is to do, 34 times 40. Because once again, we're like subtracting 3, adding 3. 34 times 40 is 1360 plus 4 zeros at the end. But wait, it's divided by 1,000. So we should actually only add 10 at the end. And so this is our answer. And so this is kind of like a more difficult problem, I would say. If you can't do this just yet, don't worry. It just comes with practice, really, and like kind of knowing what you can round to, what's going to cost you, too much time versus not. But this is 13600, and in case you're concerned about all the rounding that we did along the way, know that this is actually less than 2% off the actual answer, so you are in safe hands here. Now, we do have a second kind of problem that I think is a much easier kind of problem. So we're going to do 2 of those first before we get back into these. So maybe, kind of be ruminating on this while you're doing these. Our second kind of problem is big number divided by other number, basically. And what we do for these is pretty much rounding. Like our most basic multiplication estimation questions, this all really just comes down to good rounding. For example, 714285 divided by 179. Now, this is a little bit mean of them because this is a trick question. If you, and hopefully you do recognize 714285 as 5/7 times a million. If you do recognize that, don't do it. It's a trap, okay? 714285, the best route here is to actually approximate this as 720000 divided by 180, because this is 72 divided by 18 is a whole number. It's 4. And so the way we motivate this is look at 179. 179 is not a good number by any means, but it can round to 180 very easily. So then we start thinking 180. Okay, what can we round this to make it divisible by 180? And then so we think, what are multiples of 18? 18, 18, 36, 54, 72. This is very close to 72. So we can round it to 72. So it's 72,000 divided by 180. It's going to be 4,000. So once again, a little bit of a mean question, but really just stick to the basics with rounding here and you're going to be fine. It's a very similar idea for our next question too. So if you can try to get ahead of me, that would be great. 393852 divided by 129. Okay, how can we do that? Well, let's look at 129 again. 129, that's not a nice number, so we can round it to 130. Now, what are some multiples of 130? What would make this nice? 130, 260, 390. This is really close to 390. It's only about, less than 1% off, actually. So, oh, shoot. We might as well round this to 390000. And so we can just do this division. And then when we divide it, we're going to have 3,000. Like so. So you can see these kinds of problems, it's really just knowing like what to round to, essentially. It's not hard like these are. But of course, we can't escape these questions, so we have to get back to them. 51 to the power of 4 divided by 10 cubed. This is a little bit easier than this one, in my opinion. So if you remember your estimation stuff, this shouldn't be too bad. But just in case, let's go through the motions. 51 to the power of 4. We're going to write that as 51 squared. And now we have a trick for squaring 51 squared. We know that that is going to be 2601 from our trick for squaring numbers from 40 to 60. It's going to be 2601 squared. And now what's 2601? It's basically 2600. We can round this to 2600 and have basically zero error. So this is 2600 squared. And now this basically comes down to knowing what 26 squared is. And 26 squared we should hopefully have memorized. It is 676. 676, 0, 0, 0, 0. But don't write that down on your paper because we have to divide by 10 cubed. So we actually erase 3 zeros and we have 6760. Very nice. And you could write 6767 if you wanted. So our last problem is going to be the hardest because here we have something to the power of 8. And 8 is a big number. But there is actually something nice about 8 that makes this problem, a little less horrible than it would be otherwise. Like something, 51 to the power of 4 is 51 squared. So 23 to the power of 8 is actually 23 squared. And so we can use that to simplify our calculations a little bit. And furthermore, we can actually just do 23 divided by 10 and then to the power of 8 because they have the same exponent. So I'm going to do that. But note that you can also just do 23 to the power of 8 and then move the decimal place 8 places to the left if you would like to do that, if it helps you. But I'm going to do this instead. So 2.3 squared. All right, now let's get on it. What's 2.3 squared? Hopefully, if you are familiar with your decimal operations especially, you'll know that it's about 5.29. It is 5.29. So it's 5.29 squared. But how do we do 5.29 squared? Well, that's not a nice number, but we can round it to make it a nice number. We can round it to 5.3 squared. And 5.3 we know how to square because we have a trick for squaring numbers in between 40 and 60. So what's 5.3 squared? That's 53 squared divided by 100. What's 53 squared? It's 2809. So 5.3 squared is going to be 28.09. Now our last step is to think about how do we square 28.09? Well, this is really close to 28, so let's just round it to 28 squared. And at 28 squared, hopefully we should have memorized it is just 784. And in case you're worried, again, about any of the rounding that we did, know that the correct answer is actually just about 783. So we are actually super close to the right answer here. 784, absolutely acceptable. So that is division. And note that while there are some very easy problems or easier problems that you might see as just the inverse of multiplication, there are some harder problems that I would say are just exponents dialed up a notch. So if you can understand this and if you can understand the exponents, I would say you're definitely good. But of course the harder part is going to be exponents. So if you feel shaky on this, you can also go back to the exponents video to review. But yeah, as long as you understand this, you should be absolutely good. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.